Hello, my dear students of magic. It's Demian. Welcome back to the dormitory for another evening of shared parchment, ancient tales, and peaceful rest. Today we are diving into the extraordinary life of one of the most beloved magical beings in the wizarding world. A small creature with enormous eyes and an even more enormous heart. This is the story of Dobby the House-Elf, a tale that begins in darkness and servitude but transforms into something beautiful. A journey from enslavement to freedom, from fear to courage, from loneliness to friendship. So settle in, get comfortable, and let us travel together through the remarkable life of this brave little elf, whose devotion and sacrifice would change the course of wizarding history. To truly understand Dobby's story, we must first understand what it means to be a house elf in the magical world. For without grasping the reality of their existence, we cannot fully appreciate the magnitude of Dobby's journey, or the courage it required for him to walk the path he chose. House elves are small, humanoid magical creatures, typically standing only about 3 feet tall, roughly the height of a young child. If you were to see one standing before you, the first thing that would capture your attention would be their eyes. Imagine the largest, most expressive eyes you've ever seen, luminous orbs as large as tennis balls, capable of conveying depths of emotion that words could never capture. These eyes have witnessed centuries of servitude, absorbing the sorrow and resignation of generations. Yet in Dobby's eyes, there remains something else, a flicker of hope, a stubborn refusal to accept that his fate was sealed. Their ears are perhaps their second most distinctive feature. Long and bat-like, pointed at the tips, covered in fine wrinkled skin that seems almost translucent in certain lights. These ears are constantly in motion, moving and twitching to catch every sound in their environment. A necessity for creatures who must always be alert to their master's calls, who must hear the summons from distant wings of grand manners, who must anticipate needs before they are even spoken. When Dobby was nervous or excited, which was often, his ears would flap wildly, creating a sort of gentle breeze around his head, an endearing quirk that made him seem even more vulnerable and childlike. Their noses are thin and pencil-like, often slightly upturned, and their mouths are small but capable of the widest smiles or the deepest frowns. House elves are creatures of profound emotion, wearing their hearts openly on their faces, incapable of the cool detachment that many wizards practice. When they are happy, their joy is radiant and pure, like a child experiencing wonder for the first time. When they grieve, their sorrow is equally profound, all-consuming in its intensity. This emotional transparency made Dobby particularly sympathetic to those who took the time to truly see him, to recognize him as a person rather than a possession. Their limbs, though spindly and delicate in appearance, possess a surprising strength that belies their fragile look. House elf bodies are built for labor, for carrying heavy loads, for scrubbing floors on hands and knees, for reaching into tight spaces to clean, for enduring hours upon hours of physical work without rest. Their fingers are long and nimble, perfect for the detailed work of polishing silver, mending clothes with tiny stitches, or preparing elaborate dishes in vast kitchens. Despite appearing frail, house elves can work tirelessly for days if required by their masters, sustained by their magic and their conditioning to view exhaustion as simply part of their duty. But it is not their physical appearance alone that defines house elves. It is the magic that courses through their very being, an ancient power that predates much of wizarding civilization, a magic unlike anything witches and wizards possess. To understand house elf magic is to understand why their enslavement is so tragic, and why their potential, if ever fully unleashed, would shake the foundations of wizarding society. House elf magic is fundamentally different from wizard magic in ways that most witches and wizards do not fully comprehend or perhaps deliberately choose not to acknowledge. While witches and wizards require wands as focal points for their spells, carefully crafted instruments made from wood and magical cores, house elves need no such tools. Their magic flows directly from their will, from their intent, from the very core of their being, manifesting with nothing more than a snap of their fingers or the sheer force of their determination. This wandless magic is not weak or limited as one might assume. In fact, it is astonishingly powerful and versatile. When a house elf truly commits to an action, when they focus their will on a specific outcome, the resulting magic can rival or even exceed that of accomplished wizards. Consider what Dobby achieved throughout his life. He levitated Aunt Petunia's massive pudding dessert without a wand, without an incantation, simply through intention. He enchanted a bludger, a heavy iron ball designed to knock Quidditch players from their brooms, causing it to ignore all other players and focus solely on Harry Potter. A feat of magical manipulation that required sustaining a complex charm throughout an entire match while Dobby sat invisible in the stands. He sealed the magical barrier at platform 9 3/4, overriding enchantments that had stood for decades, meant to allow only young wizards to pass through, demonstrating that elf magic could interfere with and override established wizarding infrastructure. Perhaps most impressive of all is the house elf ability to apparate, the magical form of teleportation that wizards must study extensively to perform safely. House elves can apparate naturally, instinctively, without training or practice. They simply will themselves to be elsewhere, and they are there. But even more remarkable is that they can apparate in places where wizards cannot, places protected by powerful anti-apparition charms, cast by the most skilled wizards. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, for instance, is one of the most heavily warded locations in all of Britain. Its protections, layered over centuries by Hogwarts founders and subsequent headmasters, make it impossible for any witch or wizard to apparate directly into or out of the castle grounds. The magic that enforces this restriction is ancient and formidable, designed to protect students from intruders who might otherwise appear in corridors or common rooms without warning. Yet house elves move in and out of Hogwarts freely, appearing and disappearing at will as if the protective enchantments simply do not exist for them. This is not because the enchantments are flawed or weak. It is because house elf magic operates on a different frequency, as it were, a different channel of magical energy that the protections designed for wizard magic simply do not address. In magical theory, this suggests that house elf magic draws from a different source, or follows different rules than the magic wizards practice. Some scholars have speculated that house elf magic is older, more primal, connected to the earth and nature, in ways that wand-based magic is not. Others suggest that the binding of house elves actually limits their magic, forcing it into certain channels to make them better servants, and that a truly free house elf with full understanding of their capabilities might wield power that would astound and perhaps terrify the wizarding world. House elves can perform other remarkable feats as well. They can levitate objects of significant mass with ease, moving furniture, carrying trays laden with heavy dishes, suspending chandeliers in midair if necessary. They can cast powerful charms without verbalizing them, enchanting objects to behave in specific ways, creating barriers and protections, even performing healing magic in some cases. They possess incredible skill at transfiguration, able to modify objects and materials to suit their purposes. When Dobby worked at Hogwarts, he knitted socks, creating intricate patterns and designs with yarn, transforming simple materials into works of functional art. This required not just manual dexterity, but also an understanding of how to magically enhance the durability and comfort of the garments he created. Most striking of all is the combat potential of house elf magic. When motivated to protect someone they care about, when fighting for a cause they believe in, a house elf becomes a formidable and dangerous opponent. We saw this when Dobby confronted Lucius Malfoy after gaining his freedom. He did not hesitate, did not show fear. He raised his finger like a wand, and with a blast of pure magical energy, he sent a fully grown wizard, a Death Eater, with decades of magical training and combat experience, tumbling down a stone staircase. Lucius was not merely pushed back. He was thrown with enough force to leave him bruised and shaken, unable to retaliate. This was a house elf, a creature wizards considered inferior, demonstrating power that equaled or exceeded that of his former master. Later, during the rescue at Malfoy Manor, Dobby displayed even more impressive magical abilities. He disarmed Narcissa Malfoy with a casual snap of his fingers, sending her wand flying from her hand as if she were a child having a toy taken away. He unscrewed and dropped a massive crystal chandelier, a piece of decorative art that weighed hundreds of pounds, causing it to crash precisely where he intended, creating chaos but not actually killing anyone, showing both power and control. And he managed to apparate multiple people in rapid succession, first taking Luna, Dean, and Ollivander to safety, then returning under extreme duress to rescue Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Griphook, all while under attack, all while in a manner he had been enslaved in for decades, all while facing the very Death Eaters who represented his past trauma. The magical stamina and precision required for this is difficult to overstate. The magical potential of house elves is truly staggering, which makes their systematic enslavement all the more tragic and unjust. One can only imagine what house elves might achieve if they were free to explore and develop their magic. If they were educated in magical theory rather than simply trained to perform household tasks. What discoveries might they make? What new forms of magic might they develop? What could they contribute to magical society if they were treated as equals rather than servants? These questions haunted Hermione Granger and others who recognized the injustice of the house elf condition, who saw beyond the conditioning and cultural indoctrination to the beings underneath. Beings with their own thoughts, feelings, hopes, and untapped potential. For you see, house elves in the wizarding world are bound, not by chains or cages, but by something far more insidious and inescapable. by magic itself woven into the very fabric of their being. From the moment of their birth, perhaps even before birth, house-elves are magically enslaved to serve wizarding families. This bond is not merely psychological or cultural, though those elements certainly reinforce it. It is not simply tradition or social pressure, though generations of conditioning play a role. It is an actual magical compulsion, a binding that operates at the level of their soul, woven into their essence so deeply that disobeying a direct order from their master causes them physical and emotional agony that most wizards cannot begin to comprehend. Imagine, if you will, that every fiber of your being, every cell in your body, every thought in your mind is attuned to serving another person. Imagine that when this person tells you to do something, anything, your body begins to move before your conscious mind can even process the command. Imagine that if you try to resist, if you attempt to assert your own will against theirs, pain floods through you, originating not from any external source but from within, as if your own body is punishing you for the crime of independent thought. This is the reality of house-elf servitude. When a house-elf goes against their master's wishes, even in thought, even in the privacy of their own mind, they feel compelled to punish themselves. This is not a choice. They cannot simply decide to be strong, to endure the discomfort, to push through. The compulsion is absolute, undeniable, as natural and unavoidable as breathing. They will bang their heads against walls, the solid stone of castle corridors, or the fine wood of manor doors, hitting themselves with enough force to leave bruises, to draw blood, to cause their vision to blur and their ears to ring. They will iron their own hands, pressing hot metal against their own skin, feeling the flesh burn and blister, enduring agony that would make any human scream, all because some part of their magic-bound consciousness tells them this is what they must do. This is the price of stepping out of line. The physical manifestation of this self-punishment is horrifying to witness. But the psychological torture is perhaps even worse. Imagine being unable to trust your own body, knowing that it will betray you at another's command. Imagine having thoughts, feelings, opinions, desires of your own, but being unable to express them, unable to act on them, unable to live according to them because the magical binding forces you into compliance. This is not servitude chosen freely, not employment willingly entered into. This is slavery in its purest, most absolute form, enforced not by chains that might be broken or guards that might be overcome, but by magic that cannot be fought, that is as inescapable as gravity or the need for air. The master's house-elves hold absolute power over them, power that goes far beyond anything a human employer could ever wield over an employee. A wizard or witch can command their house elf to do anything at all, and the elf must obey. They can order them to work without rest for days on end, and the elf will continue until they collapse from exhaustion. They can order them to inflict pain upon themselves, and the elf must comply. They can forbid them from speaking, from eating, from seeking comfort or rest, and these prohibitions become absolute. There are no labor laws protecting house elves, no minimum standards of treatment, no oversight or accountability. The only limitation on what a master can demand is the master's own conscience. And as we saw with the Malfoys, not all wizarding families possessed much in the way of conscience. The only way for a house elf to gain freedom to break this magical bond that has defined their existence is if their master presents them with clothes, with real garments, not the rags and pillowcases and tea towels they typically wear as uniforms of servitude. The presentation of clothing, a simple gift that in any other context would be unremarkable, breaks the magical bond that enslaves them. This is ancient magic, part of the fundamental laws that govern the relationship between wizards and house-elves, though the origins of this rule are lost to history. Some scholars speculate that it relates to the idea of ownership as property. House-elves, in the eyes of wizarding law and tradition, are property, not people. They do not own anything, not even the rags they wear. Everything they possess, including the clothes on their bodies, belongs to their masters. Therefore, the act of a master giving a house elf real clothes, garments that could be considered the elf's own property, fundamentally changes the relationship. It acknowledges the elf as capable of ownership, as someone who can possess something, and in that acknowledgement, the spell of enslavement breaks. But most wizarding families would never dream of freeing their house elves in this way. After all, why would they give up loyal, tireless, unpaid servants who ask for nothing and work without complaint? House elves do not require wages, do not demand vacation time or sick leave, do not file complaints or threaten strikes. They work from before dawn until long after midnight, if required, performing every household task imaginable, cooking elaborate meals, cleaning vast estates, tending gardens, caring for children, running errands, and doing it all without ever asking for thanks or recognition. From a purely practical standpoint, house elves are the perfect servants, and the wizarding world has grown dependent on their labor to an extent that most witches and wizards do not even fully realize. What makes this situation even more complex and troubling is that most house elves, conditioned by generations upon generations of servitude stretching back centuries, actually take pride in their bondage. They have been raised, their parents before them, their grandparents and ancestors going back hundreds of years, to believe that serving wizards is their purpose, their calling, the thing that gives their lives meaning and value. They believe that freedom is shameful, a sign of failure, that being dismissed by one's family is the worst fate imaginable. They believe that asking for payment or time off is disgraceful behavior, that only bad elves would want such things. This is not natural, of course. This is the result of centuries of conditioning, of magical binding that shapes not just behavior but thought patterns, of cultural indoctrination that tells them from infancy that they are meant to serve, that their happiness comes from making wizards happy, that their worth is measured solely by their usefulness to their masters. The thought of freedom terrifies most house elves, because it means losing their identity, their purpose, everything they have been taught to value. Who are they if not servants? What is their place in the world if not to care for wizarding families? These questions are too large, too frightening for most house elves to contemplate. It is easier, safer, more comfortable to continue in the familiar pattern, to serve and obey, and not question the system that has defined their entire existence. This makes Dobby's resistance all the more remarkable, all the more courageous, because he somehow managed to see beyond this conditioning, to recognize that there was something deeply wrong with his situation, to believe that he deserved better, even when everything in his world told him otherwise. But Dobby was different from the moment he entered this world. From the very beginning, even when he wore the filthy pillowcase of servitude that marked his status as property rather than person, even when he lived in the cold, dark, oppressive halls of Malfoy Manor, where cruelty was as common as breathing, even when he was threatened with death 5 times a day by masters who viewed him as less than an animal, Dobby was fundamentally different from other house-elves. He possessed something rare among his kind, something that should have been beaten out of him through years of abuse and conditioning, something that many would have thought impossible for a house elf to retain, a spark of resistance, a flame of independent thought that refused to be extinguished no matter how much darkness surrounded it. This spark manifested itself in subtle ways at first. While other house elves accepted their master's cruelty as normal, as deserved even, as simply the natural order of things, Dobby knew on some deep instinctive level that what was being done to him was wrong. He could not necessarily articulate why it was wrong in the beginning. He had no framework for understanding concepts like rights or justice or dignity. He had been born into servitude and knew nothing else. But somewhere in his heart, in the core of his being, he recognized that the way the Malfoys treated him was unjust, that he deserved better, that freedom was not shameful but beautiful, something to be desired rather than feared. This understanding grew over the years, every time Lucius Malfoy threatened him with death, every time he was forced to punish himself for the smallest perceived failure, every time he witnessed the Malfoys' casual cruelty toward others, toward muggles and muggleborns and anyone they considered beneath them, Dobby's conviction strengthened. He began to develop a moral compass independent of his conditioning, began to judge right from wrong, not based on what his masters told him, but based on what he could see and feel and experience. This was an extraordinary achievement for a house elf, requiring mental and emotional strength that most could never muster. And it was this spark, this stubborn refusal to accept that things had to be the way they were, that would eventually lead him to risk everything to warn a young wizard named Harry Potter about the danger that awaited him at Hogwarts. Dobby spent most of his life, likely decades, in service to the Malfoy family, the E.C. Malfoys were one of the oldest and wealthiest pure-blood wizarding families in Britain, living in a grand manor in Wiltshire, a sprawling estate with high ceilings, marble floors, ornate furnishings, and an atmosphere of cold, aristocratic superiority. The family consisted of Lucius Malfoy, a man with long platinum blonde hair and a walking cane that concealed a wand, a Death Eater who had once served Lord Voldemort, and managed to escape punishment after the Dark Lord's first fall. His wife Narcissa was equally cold and haughty, and their son Draco would grow up to attend Hogwarts alongside Harry Potter, becoming one of Harry's primary rivals. For Dobby, life in Malfoy Manor was a nightmare of cruelty and abuse. The Malfoys treated their house elf with contempt, viewing him as less than an animal, as a thing to be used and discarded at will. Lucius would threaten Dobby with death casually, as one might swat at a fly. 5 times a day, Dobby received death threats. 5 times a day, he was reminded of his worthlessness in the eyes of his masters. When he made mistakes, or when the Malfoys were simply in foul moods, they would order Dobby to punish himself, and he would be compelled to obey, forced by the magic binding him to inflict pain upon himself. He would iron his hands, pressing hot metal against his own skin. He would bang his head against hard surfaces until his vision blurred. The psychological torture of being unable to resist these commands, of having your body betray you at another's order, is almost impossible to imagine. The pillowcase Dobby wore during these years was filthy and stained, with rough holes ripped for his arms and legs. It was a garment of shame, a constant reminder of his status. The Malfoys likely never even considered replacing it or allowing him to wash it properly. To them, a clean house elf would have seemed absurd. Dobby existed to serve them, to cook their meals, to clean their opulent home, to attend to their every whim, and to remain invisible and insignificant. He slept in cramped quarters, probably in the basement or kitchen, far from the luxurious bedrooms where his masters rested. He worked from before dawn until long after the Malfoys had retired, every day, without rest, without thanks, without even basic kindness. But the worst part, perhaps, was not the physical abuse or the endless labor. It was the knowledge, the terrible burden of knowledge that Dobby carried. You see, house elves hear things. They are present in rooms when important discussions take place because wizards do not think of them as people who might understand or remember what is said. They are treated as furniture, as part of the background, and so secrets are spoken freely in their presence. And Dobby, working in the home of a Death Eater, heard many dark secrets indeed. He knew that Lucius Malfoy had been one of Voldemort's most devoted followers. He knew about the dark arts, about the cruelty inflicted on Muggle-borns and half-bloods, about the terror of the First Wizarding War. And in the summer of 1992, Dobby learned something that filled him with dread. He discovered that Lucius Malfoy was in possession of an artifact, a diary that once belonged to Tom Riddle, and this diary contained a piece of Voldemort's soul. Lucius was planning to use this diary to reopen the Chamber of Secrets at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The plan was diabolical. The diary would be slipped to a student who would unknowingly become possessed by the dark magic within it, and the chamber would open, releasing a terrible monster that would attack students, particularly those of Muggle heritage. The plot was designed to purge the school of those the Malfoys considered unworthy, to sow terror, and to discredit those who opposed Voldemort's ideology. Dobby knew all of this, and he knew that Harry Potter would be returning to Hogwarts that year. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the 1-year-old child who had somehow survived the killing curse when Voldemort tried to murder him, the baby whose mother's sacrifice had destroyed the Dark Lord's body and brought about his downfall. To Dobby, Harry Potter represented hope. When Voldemort fell, the conditions for house-elves improved slightly, at least for a time. Dark wizards lost some of their power and influence. The fear that had gripped the magical world lifted. Harry Potter had become a symbol of resistance against tyranny, and Dobby, despite his enslavement, despite the risks, despite every magical compulsion telling him to remain silent and obedient, decided he had to act. He had to warn Harry Potter, even if it cost him everything. And so, on a warm July evening in 1992, on Harry Potter's 12th birthday, Dobby did something almost unthinkable for a house elf. He left Malfoy Manor without permission. The magical pain of this act of disobedience must have been excruciating, but Dobby endured it. he apparated to number 4, Privet Drive in Surrey, to the home of Harry's Muggle relatives, the Dursleys. He arrived in Harry's bedroom, and there, bouncing nervously on the bed, was a small creature with enormous green eyes, bat-like ears, and a pillowcase for clothing. Harry, who had spent a miserable summer with his aunt, uncle, and cousin, was astonished to see a house elf, especially one who seemed to know who he was. Dobby introduced himself in that high, squeaky voice of his, speaking in the third person, a linguistic quirk common to house elves, a remnant of centuries of conditioning that prevented them from even using the word I, from asserting their own identity. Dobby has come to warn Harry Potter, he said, trembling with fear and determination. When Harry politely asked him to sit, Dobby burst into tears, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of being treated as an equal by a wizard. This small gesture, this basic courtesy, was something he had never experienced in all his years at Malfoy Manor. He wept loudly, causing concern that the Dursleys, who were hosting an important dinner party downstairs, might hear the commotion. Vernon Dursley had been trying to finalize a business deal, and any disruption could ruin everything. Dobby tried to explain why he had come, though he was magically bound from revealing too much. He could not name his masters, could not speak directly about the plot, but he hinted desperately at danger. Harry Potter must not go back to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry this year, Dobby pleaded. Terrible things will happen. Terrible things. Harry, confused and growing frustrated, demanded to know what terrible things. Who was planning them? But Dobby could only shake or nod his head, unable to speak without triggering the compulsion to punish himself. Every time he came close to betraying his masters, he would start hitting himself, banging his head, crying out in anguish. Then Dobby revealed something that hurt Harry deeply. He had been intercepting Harry's mail all summer. Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and Rubeus Hagrid had all been writing to Harry, but their letters never arrived. Dobby had been stealing them, hoping that if Harry thought his friends had abandoned him, he would not want to return to Hogwarts. Harry was furious. He had been lonely and miserable all summer, believing his friends had forgotten about him. And now he learned it was all because of this well-meaning but misguided elf's interference. But Dobby's logic, in his simple, desperate way, made a kind of sense. If Harry had no friends at school, he would not want to go back. And if he did not go back, he would be safe from whatever horror awaited at Hogwarts. But Harry refused to promise he would stay away. Hogwarts was his home, the first place he had ever felt he belonged. His friends were there, his education, his future, everything that mattered. He would not abandon it based on vague warnings from a house elf he had just met. Dobby, seeing that words would not work, resorted to action. He used his magic to levitate Aunt Petunia's masterpiece dessert, a towering pudding covered in sugared violets, meant to impress the important guests downstairs. With a gesture, Dobby sent the pudding floating. And when Harry still refused to promise to stay away from Hogwarts, Dobby dropped it. The dessert crashed to the floor with a thunderous splatter, cream and sugar and violet petals exploding across the pristine kitchen. The Dursleys' guests screamed. Vernon Dursley roared in rage. The dinner party was ruined, the business deal lost. And as if that were not bad enough, an owl arrived moments later, dropping a letter from the Ministry of Magic directly onto the head of one of the terrified guests. The letter was an official warning, stating that the hover charm had been detected at the Dursley residence, and Harry Potter was being warned that underage wizards were not permitted to use magic outside of school. A second offense will result in expulsion. Vernon, reading this letter aloud, realized with malicious glee that Harry could not use magic against them anymore. The threat that had kept him in line was gone. They locked Harry in his room, barring the window with iron bars, intending to keep him prisoner for the rest of the summer. Dobby's intervention, meant to protect Harry, had instead made his life far worse. But Dobby did not give up. He was nothing if not persistent. When Harry's friends, the Weasley brothers, Ron, Fred, and George, arrived in a flying car to rescue Harry from his locked room, Dobby realized his plan had failed, so he tried again. On September 1st, when Harry and Ron were rushing through King's Cross Station to catch the Hogwarts Express, Dobby sealed the magical barrier at platform 9 3/4. The barrier, which normally allowed young wizards to pass through a brick wall to access the hidden platform, became solid. Harry and Ron crashed into it, unable to pass through. They missed the train. Rather than give up and go home, the two boys made a reckless decision. They flew Mr. Weasley's enchanted Ford Anglia all the way to Scotland to Hogwarts, a journey of hundreds of miles in a car that, while capable of flight and invisibility, was never meant for such a long trip. They arrived at the castle but crashed spectacularly into the Whomping Willow, a violent sentient tree on the grounds that nearly killed them. Ron's wand was broken in the crash, and both boys were in serious trouble, nearly expelled for violating the international statute of secrecy by flying a magical car in broad daylight where muggles might see it. Dobby, hearing about this, was devastated. His attempt to save Harry had once again endangered him. Finally, Dobby tried one last desperate tactic. During the first Quidditch match of the school year, a game where students flew on broomsticks and tried to score points with various balls, Dobby enchanted a bludger, one of the heavy iron balls that normally tried to knock players off their brooms. He bewitched it to ignore all other players and focus solely on Harry Potter. The rogue bludger chased Harry relentlessly throughout the game, slamming into him repeatedly, breaking his arm even as he caught the golden snitch and won the match for his house. Dobby's logic was simple and tragically flawed. If Harry were injured badly enough, he would be sent home from school, away from the danger of the Chamber of Secrets. Dobby only meant to maim or seriously injure, he later explained tearfully. He never wanted to kill Harry, only to hurt him enough to save him. That night, Dobby visited Harry in the hospital wing, where Madame Pomfrey was regrowing the bones in Harry's arm, a long and uncomfortable process made necessary because the fraud professor Gilderoy Lockhart had accidentally vanished Harry's bones entirely while trying to heal them. Dobby crept to Harry's bedside, wringing his hands, tears streaming down his face. He confessed to everything, to the sealed barrier, to the rogue bludger, to all the chaos he had caused. Harry was furious, but also in a strange way touched. This bizarre little elf cared enough about him to risk everything. In his emotional state, Dobby let slip a crucial clue. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened before," he said, then immediately began punishing himself for revealing too much, hitting himself with whatever was at hand. Harry tried to press for more information, but Dobby could not say more without violating his orders. He heard footsteps approaching and vanished with a loud crack. disapparating even though Hogwarts was supposedly protected against such magic, demonstrating once again the unique power of house-elf magic. Throughout that terrible year, the Chamber of Secrets was indeed opened. A basilisk, a giant serpent whose gaze could kill, was unleashed in the school. Students were petrified, turned to stone by seeing the monster's reflection. Fear gripped Hogwarts. Accusations flew. Harry, who could speak to snakes due to his connection to Voldemort, was suspected by many of being the heir of Slytherin, the one controlling the monster. But in the end, Harry discovered the truth. Ginny Weasley, Ron's younger sister, had been possessed by the memory of Tom Riddle preserved in the diary. Lucius Malfoy had slipped the diary into her cauldron at the beginning of the year, intending for her to unwittingly open the chamber and release the basilisk. Harry descended into the chamber, fought the memory of Riddle, which was actually a young Voldemort, and destroyed both the diary and the basilisk, saving Ginny and the school. After all this was resolved, Lucius Malfoy came to Hogwarts, summoned by the Board of Governors. He brought Dobby with him, snapping his fingers and ordering the house-elf to heel like a dog. Harry, seeing Dobby trailing behind his cruel master, understood at last. Dobby's master was Lucius Malfoy. Dobby had been trying to warn Harry about his own master's plot. And in that moment, Harry decided to do something extraordinary. He had the destroyed diary in his possession, the very object Lucius had used to orchestrate the whole terrible plan. Harry took one of his own socks, a grimy, slimy sock covered in basilisk venom and muck from the chamber, and he stuffed the diary inside it. He then confronted Lucius in front of Professor Dumbledore, the headmaster. "Here," Harry said, thrusting the sock-wrapped diary at Lucius. "I believe this belongs to you." Lucius, disgusted by the filthy sock, ripped it off the diary and threw it aside in contempt. The sock sailed through the air, and Dobby caught it. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Dobby stared at the sock in his hands as if it were made of pure gold. His enormous eyes widened even further. His hands trembled. Slowly, understanding dawned on his face. "Master has given Dobby a sock," he whispered in wonder. "Master has presented Dobby with clothes. Dobby is free." The magic that had bound him his entire life shattered in that instant. The compulsion, the pain, the invisible chains, all of it broke apart and fell away like dust. Dobby looked down at himself, at the filthy pillowcase he had worn for so long, and for the first time in his life he was not a slave. He was free. Lucius Malfoy's face went white with rage. He realized what Harry had done, how he had been tricked. His house-elf, his servant, was lost to him. He lunged at Harry, drawing his wand, likely intending to curse the boy for his interference. But Dobby stepped between them. This tiny, fragile-looking creature, who moments ago had been cowering in the presence of his master, now stood tall, or as tall as a 3-foot house-elf could stand. He raised one finger, pointing it at Lucius Malfoy like a wand, and with a blast of magic, he sent Lucius flying backward down the stone staircase. The powerful aristocratic wizard tumbled helplessly, defeated by the elf he had tormented for years. "You shall not harm Harry Potter," Dobby declared, his voice no longer meek but filled with righteous fury. Lucius, bruised and humiliated, scrambled to his feet and fled, shooting hateful glares back at both Harry and his former servant. Dobby turned to Harry, tears of joy now streaming down his face. "Harry Potter set Dobby free," he said, his voice choked with emotion. He looked at Harry with something close to worship, with gratitude so profound it seemed to radiate from his entire being. He called Harry his friend, his savior. Harry, slightly embarrassed by this adoration, made one request of the newly freed elf. "Just promise me you'll never try to save my life again," Harry said with a slight smile. Dobby agreed most earnestly, though as we will see, this was a promise he could not keep, not when it truly mattered. Dobby left Hogwarts that day a free elf, carrying his precious sock, wearing it like a badge of honor. He could go where he wished, do as he pleased, speak his mind. But freedom, he soon discovered, came with its own challenges. The wizarding world was not accustomed to free house-elves. Most families found the very concept bizarre, even disturbing. A house-elf who wanted to be paid for their labor, who wanted days off, who refused to serve without question. It was unheard of, scandalous, shameful in the eyes of both wizards and other house-elves. Dobby spent the next 2 years searching for employment. He traveled across Britain, going from family to family, asking if they needed a house-elf who would work for wages. He was turned away again and again. Wizarding families did not pay their house-elves. The idea was absurd to them. Why would they hire an elf who demanded compensation when they could simply have one bound to serve them for free? Other house-elves, when they heard about Dobby, looked at him with pity and disdain. They whispered that he had lost his way, that he had no proper shame. A house-elf without a master was unnatural, a disgrace to their kind. Dobby felt the weight of their judgment, but he never regretted his freedom. Every morning he woke up without a master to command him was a gift, even if it came with loneliness and uncertainty. During this time of wandering, Dobby encountered another freed house-elf, a female elf named Winky, who had been dismissed by her master, Bartemius Crouch Sr. Unlike Dobby, Winky had not wanted freedom. She had been fired in disgrace after being found with a wand at the Quidditch World Cup, and she viewed her dismissal as the ultimate humiliation, the end of her purpose and identity. Winky fell into a deep depression, drinking butterbeer, which for house elves was far more intoxicating than it was for humans, until she could barely function. Dobby found her and looked after her with immense compassion, even though she could not understand his joy in being free. He protected her, comforted her when she cried, and eventually helped her find work alongside him, though she never recovered from the loss of her servitude. Finally, in late 1994, Dobby's fortunes changed. He and Winky came to Hogwarts, to the office of Albus Dumbledore, the wise and powerful headmaster who had always treated magical creatures with respect. Dobby asked if there might be work available in the castle kitchens. Dumbledore, ever progressive in his thinking, saw an opportunity to support a free elf. He offered Dobby a generous salary, 10 galleons a week, and weekends off, an amount that would have been considered luxurious even for some human workers. But Dobby, still carrying some remnants of house elf nature, was horrified by the offer. He actually shivered at the thought of so much money and leisure. It frightened him. He liked working, needed it as part of his identity. So he bargained Dumbledore down, asking for 1 galleon a week and 1 day off per month. Dumbledore agreed with a smile, amused and impressed by Dobby's negotiating skills. He also told Dobby that he was free to call Dumbledore whatever he wished, even a barmy old codger, if it pleased him. This degree of respect and autonomy was something Dobby had never imagined possible. And so, Dobby joined the staff at Hogwarts, working in the vast kitchens beneath the Great Hall. These kitchens were enormous with high ceilings, 4 long tables that mirrored those in the hall above, great fireplaces, and ovens where house-elves prepared feasts for hundreds of students. Over 100 house-elves worked there, cooking, cleaning, serving, all of them bound to Hogwarts itself, happy in their servitude. But they did not welcome Dobby with open arms. They viewed him as an aberration, a shameful example of an elf who had abandoned the proper way. They muttered about him behind his back, about how he accepted payment, how he took days off, how he had no master. They gave him a wide berth when he worked, refusing to associate too closely with him for fear of being tainted by his scandalous behavior. Winky, who worked alongside him, was in an even worse state, drunk most of the time, sobbing about her lost family. But at least she still condemned Dobby's desire for freedom, which gave the other elves some comfort that not all freed elves had lost their minds. But Dobby did not let their rejection diminish his joy. He had a safe place to sleep, a small corner of the kitchen that he decorated with cast-off cushions and blankets. He had work that he loved, preparing food and keeping the castle clean. He had money to spend, which he used primarily to buy socks, his favorite article of clothing, since a sock had been the instrument of his freedom. He began collecting socks of all colors and patterns, wearing mismatched pairs with pride. He would wear a mustard yellow sock on one foot and a violet one on the other, adding scarves, ties, and even a tea cozy on his head as a hat. To the other elves he looked ridiculous. To the student who occasionally saw him, he was eccentric and amusing. But to Dobby, each piece of clothing was a celebration of his autonomy, a visible symbol that he served no master but himself. During his time at Hogwarts, Dobby developed a special relationship with Hermione Granger, one of Harry's best friends. Hermione, always passionate about justice, had been horrified to learn about house-elf enslavement. She founded an organization called the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, or SPEW, dedicated to improving conditions for house-elves and eventually freeing them all. Her methods, however, were somewhat misguided. She began knitting small hats and socks and hiding them around Gryffindor Tower, hoping that house elves would pick them up while cleaning and thus be accidentally freed. The Hogwarts elves found this deeply insulting. They felt that Hermione was trying to trick them, to force freedom upon them against their will. In protest, they refused to clean Gryffindor Tower at all, leaving it to accumulate dust and clutter. Only Dobby continued to clean there, delighted by the hidden clothes, collecting every hat and sock Hermione left behind, piling them on his head in a towering stack. This meant he could see Harry and his friends more often, which pleased him immensely. Hermione felt validated that at least one house elf appreciated her efforts, even if the others did not. Dobby remained fiercely loyal to Harry throughout his years at Hogwarts. In Harry's 4th year, during the Triwizard Tournament, a dangerous magical competition between 3 wizarding schools, Dobby played a crucial role in helping Harry survive the second task. The task required Harry to rescue someone important to him from the bottom of the Black Lake, staying underwater for an hour. Harry had no idea how to breathe underwater and was panicking the night before the task. But Barty Crouch Jr., a Death Eater disguised as the defense against the dark arts teacher, Alastair. Moody wanted Harry to succeed in the tournament as part of a larger plot. He arranged for Dobby to overhear a conversation about gillyweed, a magical plant that would allow Harry to breathe underwater by temporarily giving him gills. Dobby, ever eager to help Harry, stole gillyweed from Professor Snape's private stores in the dungeons. A dangerous theft that could have resulted in severe punishment if he had been caught. He brought the gillyweed to Harry's dormitory early on the morning of the task, waking Harry and pressing the slimy plant into his hands, urging him to eat it quickly. Harry, though startled, trusted Dobby and ate the gillyweed just before diving into the lake. It worked perfectly, allowing him to breathe underwater, swim efficiently, and rescue not only Ron but also Fleur Delacour's younger sister, demonstrating the compassion that defined his character. Harry later thanked Dobby profusely, deeply grateful for the house-elves' continued help despite his earlier promise not to save Harry's life. In Harry's 5th year, when the Ministry of Magic sent Dolores Umbridge to Hogwarts as High Inquisitor and later Headmistress, the school fell under oppressive rule. Umbridge banned all student groups and organizations, fearing they would undermine her authority. Harry, Ron, and Hermione decided to form a secret defense club called Dumbledore's Army, where students could learn proper defensive magic that Umbridge refused to teach. They needed a place to meet in secret, somewhere Umbridge would never find. Harry mentioned this problem to Dobby in the kitchens, half joking about needing a hidden room. Dobby's eyes lit up. "Dobby knows the perfect place, sir," he squeaked excitedly. He told Harry about the Room of Requirement, also known to house-elves as the come-and-go room. It was a magical room that appeared only when someone truly needed it, and it would contain whatever the seeker required. Dobby had used it many times to hide Winky when she was too drunk to work, finding a room with antidote potions and soft beds. Thanks to Dobby's knowledge of the castle's secrets, Harry found the Room of Requirement and established it as the meeting place for Dumbledore's Army, where dozens of students learned defensive spells throughout the year. Later that year, when a member of Dumbledore's army betrayed the group to Umbridge, Dobby risked severe punishment to warn them. Umbridge had ordered all the house-elves not to tell anyone about the raid she was planning. But Dobby, loyal to Harry above all else, defied that order. He burst into the Room of Requirement during a meeting, eyes wide with terror, shouting, "They is coming!" He was already beginning to hurt himself for disobeying Umbridge's command, starting to bang his head, but Harry quickly told him not to punish himself, countermanding the compulsion. Though the warning came too late to allow everyone to escape, Dobby's bravery in defying authority to help his friend demonstrated once again that loyalty freely given was far more powerful than loyalty forced. In Harry's 6th year, Dobby undertook one of his most challenging assignments. Harry suspected that Draco Malfoy, Lucius's son and Harry's school rival, was up to something dangerous, possibly working as a Death Eater. He needed to know what Draco was doing, where he was going, what he was planning. Harry had inherited another house elf by this point, Kreacher, who had belonged to his godfather, Sirius Black. Kreacher was old, bitter, and hostile, still loyal to the old pure-blood ideology of the Black family. So Harry came up with a plan. He ordered both Dobby and Kreacher to tail Draco Malfoy, to follow him constantly and report back on his activities. Dobby accepted this mission with enthusiasm, seeing it as a way to protect Harry. Kreacher obeyed only because he was magically bound to do so, and he resented every moment of it. The partnership between Dobby and Kreacher was contentious at best. Kreacher, who loved the Malfoy family and despised Harry Potter, would try to praise Draco and insult Harry in his reports. This enraged Dobby, who could not tolerate any disrespect toward Harry. On one occasion, when Kreacher called Harry a blood traitor and suggested Draco would make a better master, Dobby lost his temper completely. The two house-elves fell into a physical fight right in front of Harry, with Dobby punching Kreacher in the mouth and knocking out half his teeth. Harry had to physically separate them, shocked that Dobby would resort to violence even against his own kind. But Dobby's devotion to Harry was absolute, and he would not stand by while Kreacher slandered the wizard who had freed him. Despite the difficulties, Dobby remained committed to the surveillance mission, staying awake for days at a time to ensure he did not miss any of Draco's movements. He would appear in Harry's dormitory looking exhausted, his clothes disheveled, his eyes even larger than usual from lack of sleep, but always ready to report what he had learned. Thanks to Dobby and Kreacher's efforts, Harry discovered that Draco was using the Room of Requirement to repair a vanishing cabinet, creating a passageway that would allow Death Eaters to enter Hogwarts. Though this knowledge could not prevent the tragedy that followed, the Battle of the Astronomy Tower where Dumbledore died. Dobby's intelligence work was invaluable. Throughout these years, Dobby also formed a quiet friendship with Aberforth Dumbledore, Albus's younger brother, who ran the Hog's Head Inn in Hogsmeade Village. Aberforth was a gruff private man who kept a pet goat and preferred solitude to company. But he saw something special in Dobby, recognized the purity of his heart and the strength of his loyalty. On his days off, Dobby would visit the Hog's Head, enjoying a butterbeer and conversation with Aberforth in the back room. The two formed an unlikely bond, the reclusive wizard and the free house elf finding companionship in their shared outsider status. Aberforth grew genuinely fond of Dobby, treating him with a kindness and respect that few wizards showed house elves. This friendship would prove crucial in the dark days to come, for the Second Wizarding War had begun in earnest. Voldemort had returned to power, more terrible than ever. The Ministry of Magic had fallen to his control. Hogwarts was taken over by Death Eaters. Harry, Ron, and Hermione went into hiding, searching desperately for Voldemort's Horcruxes, the objects containing pieces of his soul that kept him anchored to life. The wizarding world descended into terror, with Voldemort's followers hunting those who opposed them, murdering muggles and blood traitors, establishing a regime of pure blood supremacy. It was the darkest time in living memory, and hope seemed very far away. In March of 1998, disaster struck. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, along with their companions, Dean Thomas, Luna Lovegood, and the goblin Griphook, were captured by Snatchers, a gang of dark wizard bounty hunters led by the werewolf Fenrir Greyback. The Snatchers realized who they had caught and took their prisoners to Malfoy Manor, Voldemort's headquarters, to present Harry Potter to the Dark Lord. The captured group was separated. Hermione was held upstairs, where Bellatrix Lestrange, Voldemort's most sadistic follower, tortured her with the Cruciatus Curse, demanding to know how they had obtained the Sword of Gryffindor. Harry, Ron, Dean, Luna, and Griphook were thrown into the cellar dungeon, locked behind a door with no apparent escape. They were also joined by Ollivander, the elderly wand maker who had been held prisoner at the manor for months. In that dark cellar, with Hermione's screams of agony echoing from above, Harry felt a desperation unlike anything he had experienced before. They were trapped in the heart of enemy territory, wandless, helpless. He had a fragment of a two-way mirror that his godfather Sirius had given him years ago, and in his desperation, he pulled it out and stared into it, seeing a flash of blue eye. "Help us," Harry whispered to the mirror, not knowing if anyone could hear him. "Please help us." That blue eye belonged to Aberforth Dumbledore, who had been keeping watch through his own mirror, and Aberforth knew exactly who to send. There was a loud crack in the cellar, and suddenly Dobby appeared. His enormous eyes were wider than ever, filled with fear but also determination. He was back in Malfoy Manor, the place of his enslavement, facing his former masters, risking his life. But Harry Potter needed him, and that was all that mattered. "Dobby has come to rescue Harry Potter," he said in his high voice, and those words were like light-piercing darkness. Dobby could apparate in and out of the manor despite the anti-apparition enchantments that prevented wizards from doing so, because house-elf magic operated on a different frequency, one that Voldemort and his followers had arrogantly overlooked. Harry quickly gave Dobby instructions. He needed Dobby to take Luna, Dean, and Ollivander to safety at Shell Cottage first, then return for the rest of them. Dobby nodded and reached out to the three prisoners. With a crack, they vanished, apparating to the seaside home of Bill Weasley and Fleur Delacour, a safe house protected by the Order of the Phoenix. Harry felt a surge of relief. At least some of them were safe, but there was no time to celebrate. Peter Pettigrew, also known as Wormtail, came down to the cellar to check on the prisoners. Harry and Ron ambushed him, struggling to subdue the traitor. Pettigrew's silver hand, a gift from Voldemort, began to strangle Harry. But Harry reminded Pettigrew that he had once saved his life, creating a life debt. For just a moment, Pettigrew hesitated, showing mercy. But that moment of weakness was his undoing. The silver hand, sensing his hesitation, turned on him and strangled him to death. A cruel end for a man who had spent his life serving cruel masters. Upstairs, the situation was deteriorating. Bellatrix held Hermione at knife point, threatening to kill her if Harry and Ron did not surrender. Then, with another loud crack, Dobby returned. He did not appear meekly or quietly. He made a dramatic entrance by causing the massive crystal chandelier hanging above the drawing room to come crashing down. It fell between Bellatrix and Hermione, shattering into thousands of glittering pieces, creating chaos and forcing Bellatrix to leap back. In the confusion, Dobby also snapped his fingers and disarmed Narcissa Malfoy, sending her wand flying across the room. Harry seized the opportunity, grabbing wands from Draco Malfoy and stunning the werewolf Fenrir Greyback. Ron ran to Hermione and grabbed her. Bellatrix, recovering from the shock of the chandelier, screamed at Dobby. "You dare defy your masters!" she shrieked, her face twisted with rage. She recognized him as the Malfoy house-elf, the one who should be cowering in servitude. But Dobby stood tall, or as tall as his small frame allowed. He looked Bellatrix directly in the eyes, something no slave would ever dare to do. And in a voice ringing with pride and defiance, he declared, "Dobby has no master." Dobby is a free elf, and Dobby has come to save Harry Potter and his friends. It was his moment of ultimate triumph, declaring his freedom in the face of those who represented everything he had suffered. He was no longer the terrified, abused servant. He was Dobby, a free elf, a hero. Harry yelled for everyone to grab hold of Dobby. Ron held Hermione. Harry grabbed Griphook. They all reached for Dobby, forming a chain. As they prepared to disapparate, Bellatrix, in a final act of malice, hurled her silver knife at them. It spun through the air as they vanished, and for a moment it seemed they had escaped cleanly. They appeared on the moonlit beach near Shell Cottage, the sound of waves crashing on the shore, the salty wind in their faces. They had made it, they were safe. But then Harry heard a gasp. He looked down and saw Dobby staggering, his small hand still clutching Harry's. There was a knife protruding from Dobby's chest. Bellatrix's throw had found its mark in that last fraction of a second before they disappeared. Dobby collapsed into Harry's arms, blood staining his colorful mismatched clothes. Dobby, Harry whispered, his voice breaking. He lowered the house-elf gently to the sandy ground, cradling him. The others gathered around, their faces stricken with horror and grief. Luna, Dean, Ollivander, Bill, and Fleur came running from the cottage. They all knew what this meant. Dobby's enormous eyes, those expressive eyes that had shown so much emotion over the years, fear and joy and determination and love, looked up at Harry one last time. There was no fear in them now, no pain, only peace. His face impossibly held a smile. He had done what he set out to do. He had saved Harry Potter. He had saved his friends. And he had died free, on his own terms as a hero. His lips moved, forming his final words, the name of the wizard he loved most in the world. Harry Potter, he whispered, and then the light faded from his eyes. Dobby, the free elf, was gone. The grief that followed was profound. Harry, who had faced so much death and loss in his young life, felt this one cut particularly deep. Dobby had been innocence personified, goodness without guile, loyalty without question. He had asked for nothing but the chance to be free and to help those he cared about. And now he was gone, killed by the same forces of hatred and prejudice he had fought against his entire life. Harry made a decision in that moment. He would bury Dobby properly, without magic, as a mark of respect. Magic had been used to enslave Dobby, to bind him, to force him into servitude. His burial would be done with human hands, with sweat and labor. A final act of love and tribute. Harry took a shovel and began to dig in the soft earth of Shell Cottage's garden, overlooking the sea. Ron and Dean joined him, working in silence, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. They dug deep, making sure the grave was proper and secure. When it was ready, they gently laid Dobby's body inside. They dressed him in clean clothes, one of Harry's jackets, and most importantly, socks. Socks on his feet, because socks had freed him. Luna Lovegood, with her gentle, dreamy manner, leaned down and closed Dobby's eyes with her fingers, whispering, "Thank you so much, Dobby, for rescuing me and the others." Now he could be sleeping. It was a beautiful sentiment, imagining Dobby at rest, at peace. They filled the grave with earth, and Harry found a large, smooth, white stone. Using the wand he had taken from Draco Malfoy, a wand that was now his by right of conquest, Harry carved words into the stone. He chose them carefully, knowing they would stand as Dobby's epitaph for all time. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. Those 5 words encapsulated everything Dobby had been, everything he had fought for. Not, "Here lies Dobby, loyal servant." Not, "Here lies Dobby, who served the Malfoy family." But a free elf. It was an identity he had claimed for himself, one he had earned, one he had died defending. They stood around the grave in silence as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, and somewhere in the distance a seabird called out. It was a beautiful, peaceful place for Dobby to rest, far from the cold halls of Malfoy Manor, far from the darkness and cruelty he had endured for so long. He was free, truly and finally free, and his sacrifice had saved the lives of those who would go on to defeat Voldemort and bring an end to the war. Dobby's death had a profound impact on everyone who knew him. Harry found that his grief gave him strength. In the days that followed, as he planned the break-in to Gringotts Bank to retrieve another Horcrux, he noticed something strange. His scar, which usually burned with pain when Voldemort was near or experiencing strong emotions, was quiet. The grief and love Harry felt for Dobby created a shield in his mind, protecting him from Voldemort's presence. It was a form of magic that Voldemort, who had never loved anyone, who had destroyed his soul in pursuit of immortality, could never understand or penetrate. Dobby, even in death, was still protecting Harry. Griphook, the goblin who had been rescued alongside the others, was deeply moved by the respect Harry showed Dobby. Goblins had long memories of how wizards treated other magical creatures, and they rarely saw wizards honor the deaths of non-humans. The fact that Harry dug the grave by hand, that he carved an epitaph, that he wept openly for a house-elf, changed Griphook's view of him. It convinced Griphook to help Harry break into Gringotts, a decision that was crucial to the eventual defeat of Voldemort. In this way, Dobby's death created ripples that extended far beyond his own life. At Hogwarts, where the final battle would soon take place, Dobby's story inspired others. Kreacher, who had been redeemed by Harry's kindness and now served him faithfully, led the charge of Hogwarts house-elves in the Battle of Hogwarts. Over 100 house-elves poured out of the kitchens, armed with kitchen knives and ladles, attacking Death Eaters and fighting for the school they loved. They fought with a ferocity that shocked the Death Eaters, who had never imagined that house-elves could be dangerous. Kreacher shouted Dobby's name as a battle cry, and the other elves took it up. They fought in memory of the free elf who had shown them that another way was possible, even if they did not fully understand or embrace freedom themselves. They honored the courage it had taken for Dobby to choose it. In the aftermath of the war, when Voldemort was finally defeated and peace returned to the wizarding world, Dobby's legacy lived on. Hermione Granger, who had always championed house-elf rights, went on to work at the Ministry of Magic. She became a force for change, pushing through legislation that improved conditions for house-elves, giving them options and protections they had never had before. It was not a rapid transformation. House-elves themselves resisted many of the changes, still conditioned by centuries of servitude. But slowly, gradually, the wizarding world began to change its attitudes. Hermione often spoke of Dobby as an example of what house-elves could be, when given the chance to choose their own paths. She worked tirelessly to ensure that no house-elf would have to endure the abuse Dobby had suffered, that every elf would at least have the option of freedom if they wanted it. Harry Potter never forgot Dobby. In the years that followed, he would visit the grave at Shell Cottage whenever he could. Sometimes he went alone, sometimes with Ginny, Ron, and Hermione. He would stand there, looking out at the sea, and he would talk to Dobby as if the little elf could still hear him. He told him about the children he and Ginny had, about how Ron and Hermione got married, about how the wizarding world was slowly healing from the wounds of war. He always brought socks, leaving them on the grave as an offering, a reminder that Dobby had loved socks more than anything, that a single sock had been the key to his freedom. Sometimes the socks would disappear, taken by the wind or perhaps by passing house-elves who knew the story and wanted a memento of the brave free elf. Harry never minded. He always brought more. The beach where Dobby was buried became something of a pilgrimage site. It was located at Freshwater West in Pembrokeshire, Wales, where the scenes had been filmed for the movie. Fans of the story, both magical and muggle, began leaving their own tributes. Painted rocks with messages of love and remembrance appeared around the grave. Crosses made of driftwood, and socks, always socks. Colorful mismatched socks piled on the sand in honor of the elf who had treasured them. The beach authorities initially worried about the environmental impact of all these offerings, but they recognized the deep emotional connection people felt to Dobby's story. So they allowed it to continue, asking visitors to be respectful of the natural landscape while honoring the memory of the free elf. Dobby's story resonated so deeply because it spoke to universal themes that transcended the magical world. It was a story about the struggle for dignity and autonomy, about the courage it takes to stand up to those who have power over you, about the importance of loyalty freely given rather than loyalty forced. Dobby had been born into a system designed to crush his spirit, to make him believe he was worthless, that his only value lay in serving others without question or complaint. But he had somehow retained a spark of self-worth, a belief that he deserved better. And when he finally gained his freedom, he used it not for selfish purposes, not to escape or hide, but to serve in a way that he chose, to help those he loved, to fight against the forces of darkness that threatened the world. He was a small creature, barely 3 feet tall, with a squeaky voice and a tendency to punish himself for perceived failures. But he had the heart of a lion. He faced down Death Eaters, defied his masters, risked torture and death, all because he believed it was the right thing to do. He proved that bravery is not about size or strength or magical power. It is about choosing to do what is right, even when it costs you everything. It is about standing up for others even when you are terrified. It is about love, pure and simple love that asks for nothing in return. In the end, Dobby's greatest victory was not that he gained his freedom, though that was important. It was not that he helped Harry Potter defeat Voldemort, though that too was significant. His greatest victory was that he lived and died on his own terms, as himself, as Dobby the free elf, not as anyone's property or servant. He chose how to spend his time, who to help, what to stand for. He chose to die, saving his friends. And in making that choice, he affirmed the most fundamental truth of existence, that every being, no matter how small or humble or seemingly insignificant, has value and deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The wizarding world was forever changed by Dobby's example. House-elves were still bound by the old magic, still conditioned by centuries of servitude. But they knew now that another way was possible. Some, inspired by Dobby's story, began to question their lot in life. Others, like Creature, found that they could be loyal and happy in service if that service was built on mutual respect rather than cruelty and domination. The relationship between wizards and house-elves began to shift slowly, incrementally, towards something more just. It would take generations to fully undo the damage of centuries, but Dobby had planted a seed, and that seed was growing. Children in the wizarding world grew up hearing about Dobby. Parents told his story as a bedtime tale, a lesson in courage and kindness. At Hogwarts, in the kitchens, a small plaque was installed, honoring Dobby's service to the school. The house-elves who worked there would sometimes gather around it and tell stories about the free elf who had once worked alongside them. The strange little elf who wore mismatched socks and demanded payment and spoke of freedom as if it were a good thing. And though many of them still could not understand his choices, they respected his bravery. They knew that Dobby had fought in the Great War, that he had died saving Harry Potter, and that made him a hero in their eyes, even if he was a confusing, unconventional hero. As the years passed, Dobby's grave remained a place of quiet reflection. The white stone, with its simple epitaph, stood firm against the elements, washed by rain, warmed by sun, buffeted by ocean winds. The words remained clear. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. And those words served as a reminder, not just for those who visited, but for anyone who heard the story, that freedom is precious, that it must be fought for, that it is always worth the cost. Dobby had lived most of his life in darkness, in pain, in servitude, but he had found the light. He had known friendship and joy and purpose. He had made choices that mattered. And in his final moments, cradled in Harry's arms on that beach with the stars shining overhead, he had known peace. His story did not end with his death. It lived on in the hearts of those he had touched, in the changes he had inspired, in the children who heard his tale, and learned to treat all beings with kindness, regardless of their station. It lived on in every sock left on his grave, in every house elf who dared to dream of something more, in every wizard who questioned the old ways and worked to build a more just society. Dobby had been one small house elf in a vast magical world, but his impact was immeasurable. He had shown that even the smallest creature could make the biggest difference, that love and loyalty freely given were the most powerful magic of all. And so we come to the end of our journey through Dobby's life. From the cold halls of Malfoy Manor to the sunlit kitchens of Hogwarts, from desperate warnings given in a bedroom at Privet Drive to heroic sacrifice on a beach in Wales. It has been a story of suffering and triumph, of darkness and light, of a brave little elf who changed the world simply by refusing to accept that things had to be the way they had always been. Dobby showed us that freedom is not just about breaking chains or casting off masters. It is about choosing how to live, how to love, how to be. It is about dignity and autonomy and a recognition that every being has inherent worth. So remember Dobby, the free elf. Remember his enormous green eyes and his mismatched socks. Remember his devotion to Harry Potter, his kindness to Winky, his courage in the face of danger. Remember that he was born a slave but died a hero. Remember that he chose love over fear, freedom over security, sacrifice over safety. And remember that in the end, when it mattered most, Dobby was exactly what he wanted to be. Free. Free to choose. Free to love. Free to fight. Free to die protecting those he cared about. And in that freedom, in that choice, he found something more valuable than all the magic in the world. He found himself. He found Dobby. If you enjoyed this journey through Dobby's life, please consider subscribing to Potterlore for Sleep for more magical stories told in this relaxed, soothing style. Give this video a like if Dobby's story touched your heart, and let me know in the comments what other character from the wizarding world you would like me to explore next. Thank you for spending this time with me, learning about one of the bravest characters in all of magical literature. May your dream be filled with courage, kindness, and the knowledge that you too can choose to be free. Good night.